In a review of the book, Sexuality and the Curriculum, The Politics and Practices of Sexuality Education, Debbie Epstein wrote, Post-structuralist and postmodern critiques of categorical binary divisions between, for example, male, female, straight, gay, are important in understanding the complex ways in which we all make sense of our lives, including our relationships to sexuality. We certainly need to apply some of these complex understandings to education in general and sexuality education in particular. If we are to be successful in developing effective anti-oppressive curricula, it is also important that we start applying some of the postmodern, and particularly feminist postmodern, appropriations of psychoanalytic theory to issues of sexuality in the curriculum, since these have the potential to help us understand the psychic investments which people have in maintaining both difference and inequality. By seeing the world in terms of binary oppositions with one pole of the binary oppressing the other, postmodernists prioritize the group over the individual. This way of seeing the world has been hugely influential in third-wave feminism and has had a massive detrimental impact on our culture, even if individuals don't recognize the influence on themselves. This is a challenge to both traditional liberal values and Christian values. Jordan Peterson critiqued postmodernism in a talk in Ottawa, Canada in 2017.
So I want to recommend a book first to everyone here. It's called Explaining Postmodernism, and it's by a gentleman named Stephen Hicks. And you need to understand postmodernism because that's what you're up against, and you're up against it far more than you know or think. And it's a much more well-developed and pervasive, pernicious, nihilistic, intellectually attractive doctrine than has yet come to public realization. It absolutely dominates the humanities and increasingly the social sciences in the universities. And what's happening, you see, someone once said, who unfortunately I can't remember, it might have been Friedrich Nietzsche, said that everybody is the unconscious exponent of a dead philosopher. And fortunately, the postmodern philosophers, most of them are dead, so that's a good thing. But that doesn't mean that their words aren't continually being spoken by people who are following in their wake, let's say. And it's not like any given person is absolutely possessed, say, by the spirit of postmodernism, because often they're not educated enough to know all the details about what it is that has them in their grip. But if you get 20 of them together, and they're all 5% influenced by the postmodernist ethos, you basically have the spirit of the mob that's a mouthpiece for that particular philosophical doctrine. And if you understand the doctrine, then you understand why things are progressing the way that they're progressing. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the doctrine, because it's not optional to understand this. It's absolutely crucial to understand this. You can't underestimate the power of ideas and also the power of words, of course, because ideas are expressed in words. But you see, the postmodernists completely reject the structure of Western civilization. And I mean completely. So I can give you an example in one term. Jacques Derrida, who's head trickster for the postmodernist movement, regarded Western culture, let's call it the patriarchy, as phallogocentric. Okay, so phallo comes from phallus, P-H-A-L-L-O. And so that's the insistence that what you see in Western culture is the consequence of a male-dominated, oppressive, self-serving society. And we might say, well, you know, societies do tend to be self-serving and people in power do tend to act in their best interests, but a tendency is not an absolute, and that's one of the things that needs to be considered continually. There are no shortage of flaws in the manner in which we've structured our society. And compared to any hypothetical utopia, it's an absolutely dismal wreck. But compared to the rest of the world and the plight of other societies throughout the history of mankind, we're doing pretty damn well, and we should be happy to be living in the society that we're living in. So the first thing that you might want to note about postmodernism is that it doesn't have a shred of gratitude. And there's something pathologically wrong with a person who doesn't have any gratitude, especially when they live in what so far is the best of all possible worlds. And so if you're not grateful, you're driven by resentment. And resentment is about the worst emotion that you can possibly experience apart from arrogance. Resentment, arrogance, and deceit. There's an evil triad for you. And if you're bitter about everything that's happening around you, despite the fact that you're bathed in wealth, then there's something absolutely wrong with you. You know, the black community in the United States is the 18th wealthiest community, 18th wealthiest nation on the planet. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't such a thing as relative poverty, and relative poverty matters. It's an important political economic issue, and it's very, very difficult to deal with. But absolute wealth matters too, and Western societies have been absolutely remarkable in their ability to generate and distribute wealth, as you can tell by just looking around and taking a brief bit of consideration for the absolute miracle that even a building like this represents. So you have to educate yourself about postmodernism. Okay, so here's what the postmodernists believe. They don't believe in the individual. That's the logos part. Western culture is logocentric. Logo is logos. That's partly the Christian word, but it's also partly the root word of logic, okay? They don't believe in logic. They believe that logic is part of the process by which the patriarchal institutions of the West continue to dominate and to justify their dominance.
At a Reform Bill Committee meeting on 18th of April 2024, Conservative member of the Senedd Darren Miller put a simple question to the chief executives of two feminist groups, Jemima Olchowski, the chief executive of the Fawcett Society, and Hannah Stevens, the chief executive of Elect Her. As electoral candidates are asked to declare whether they are or are not a woman, should there be a definition of what a woman is?
And there's no definition of what a woman is on the face of the bill, so it allows people to self-identify for themselves whether they're a woman or not a woman. Is that a sensible thing, or would you rather it be, a biological statement, as it were? What are your views? Do you have views on those things?
So Fawcett, I think, would take the position that this is for parties to determine what is their kind of position, and that we would support inclusive lists that would include, for instance, trans women.
Okay, thank you. And you, Hannah?
Similarly, we're not interested in defining what a woman is. The patriarchy's been doing that for long enough.
It is the patriarchy, apparently, that has defined a woman as an adult human female.
They don't believe in dialogue. The root word of dialogue is logos again. They don't believe that people of goodwill can come to consensus through the exchange of ideas. They believe that that notion is part of the philosophical substructure and practices of the dominant culture. So the reason they don't let people who they don't agree with speak on campus is because they don't agree with letting people speak.
Veteran activist Lou Thomas arranged a protest against the meeting of a Woman's Place UK at the Mirco Hotel in Cardiff in 2018. As a result of complaints from activists, the hotel cancelled the booking. She has also compared the LGB Alliance to the English Defence League and has refused to countenance members of the group being invited onto the LGBTQ+ expert panel. Despite her evident intolerance of views that differ from her own, she was asked to chair the Welsh Government's LGBTQ+ expert panel. This is a mindset that has infected young people's experience using social media, as detransitioner Helena Lacroix explains.
When you're talking about an issue, if you're like a straight white person, they would tell you that you're not allowed to have an opinion on that issue.
Yes.
And so that, like, as a teenager, I always felt very self-conscious about that I wouldn't be able to speak my mind on anything. I like to speak my mind. Like, I'm a pretty, opinionated person. But yeah, I would always get that response that I can't say what I want to say because I'm a straight white girl.
Jordan Peterson continues.
They believe that since you don't have an individual identity, your fundamental identity is group fostered. And that means that you're basically an exemplar of your race, hence white privilege, or you're an exemplar of your gender or your sex or your ethnicity, or you're an exemplar of however you can be classified so that you are placed in the position of victim against the oppressor, because that's the game. And it's a post-Marxist sleight of hand, right? The old Marxist notion was that the world was a battleground between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And so by the 1970s, it was evident that that game was up. The postmodernist Marxists just basically pulled a sleight of hand and said, okay, if it's not the poor against the rich, it's the oppressed against the oppressor. We'll just redivide the subpopulations in ways that make our bloody philosophy continue in its movement forward, and that's where we're at now. And so for the postmodernists, the world is a Hobbesian battleground of identity groups. They do not communicate with one another because they can't. All there is a struggle for power. And if you're in the predator group, which means you're an oppressor, then you better look out, because you're not exactly welcome. And neither are your ideas.
On 19th of March 2021, an open letter organised by Women Equalities Network Wales was sent to Mark Drakeford. The letter stated, on Saturday the 13th of March, women across Wales came together to mourn the loss of two of our own. We did so knowing that the violence experienced by Sarah Everard and Wen Jing Lin could have happened to any one of us. We strongly condemn the response of the Metropolitan Police and urge the Welsh Government to renew its efforts to protect women, challenge patriarchal and racial structures of oppression, and champion both cisgender and transgender women throughout Wales. Men were evidently excluded from feeling appalled by the murders. According to the Office of National Statistics, there were 190 murders of women and girls that year. There were also 494 murders of men and boys. In the UK, about 7 out of every 10 murder victims and just over 9 out of every 10 perpetrators are men. It has long been recognised that men are more prone to using physical aggression than women. Women's aggression tends to take the form of inflicting reputational damage. It is unclear how the murders of Sarah Everard and Wen Jing Lin relate to patriarchal and racial structures of oppression. The postmodern influence on the letter is also evident in the call to champion both cisgender and transgender women throughout Wales. It is not obvious that transgender women do not retain male-type levels of aggression. Nevertheless, the letter was signed by numerous women from third sector agencies who were evidently influential in their organisations. At that time, Catherine Fookes was the Chief Executive Officer of Women Equality Network Wales, and she is a great supporter of Professor Emma Reynolds.
I mean, a lot of this comes down to education. A lot of the remit of this committee, I think, the culture could be changed by going into schools and really encouraging, exploring gender, healthy relationships, sexism, feminism, and all these things. It's something that we work with Professor Emma Reynolds at Cardiff University on, going to schools with our Agenda programme.
In the early version of Agenda, there is a contribution from then Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Children, Carl Sargeant. I'm really pleased that we have supported this guide for children and young people as well, and I hope that it will encourage you to take action and do something creative to make positive changes that will benefit you. I'm sure that this will be a major step towards our goal of ultimately eradicating violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. Sargeant was removed as a cabinet minister by Carwyn Jones on 3rd of November 2017 after allegations were made of inappropriate behaviour by him towards women. Sargeant took his own life on 7th November 2017. An inquest into his death reported. In or around October 2017, rumours were circulating in relation to allegations of inappropriate behaviour by Carl Sargeant towards women, and allegations alluding to this were specifically made to Matt Greenough, a special advisor to the First Minister. I remind myself that the veracity of those allegations has not formed any part of my investigation. I have sought to remain within my statutory remit as coroner. However, the absence of the investigation of those allegations at this inquest should in no way be seen as a diminution of the seriousness of these matters, nor as any slight to those women who brought their complaints to the attention of the Welsh Government. Matt Greenough made contact with the complainants, and they confirmed that they were prepared to put their complaints in writing, as a result of which the decision was taken by the First Minister that it would be necessary to refer this matter to the Labour Party, which was duly done. Sargeant was removed from office on Friday the 3rd of November 2017. On the morning of the 7th of November, on more than one occasion, Carl Sargeant spoke to another friend, Sophie Howe, who tried to reassure him, suggesting that he should call the Labour Party to attempt to find out what was going on. He did this around 9 a.m, but was unsuccessful in speaking to the head of disputes at that time, Sam Matthews, as he was about to get on an underground train. He would not have been able to speak to Mr. Sargeant regarding what he already knew was the sensitive matter of his suspension from the party for the investigation of allegations of unwelcome attention, inappropriate touching and groping, as this information had been conveyed by him to solicitors whom Mr. Sargeant had consulted on the previous Friday afternoon. Between 9:05 a.m. and around 10:35 a.m. on the 7th of November 2017, Carl Sargeant wrote a note to his wife, children, family and friends, and I remind myself now of that. He then placed a ligature around his neck and ended his life by hanging himself. On that very same day, Catherine Fookes published an article for Women Equality Network Wales titled Misogyny and the MeToo Movement, Where Next for Wales? She wrote, with lurid headlines coming at us almost every day regarding behaviour of men in both Westminster and now the Welsh Assembly, you can't switch on the radio or TV without hearing about what our response should be, who should be saying what, and whether it's becoming a witch hunt or whether women are overreacting. And the floodgates have opened, with women finally feeling they're able to share their stories with the hashtag MeToo. Brave women such as Bex Bailey, Jane Merrick, Kate Maltby, Cathy Owens and many more have all spoken up in the last 2 weeks, and in doing so they have stood up for women everywhere so that this country can one day have a future free from harassment and abuse. Postmodernists see the world as a power battle between groups. Jordan Peterson sees this movement as socially corrosive.
So that's what you're up against. I would say it's time for conservatives to stop apologizing for being conservatives. And you don't apologize to these people. That's a big mistake. Apology, they read apology as an admission of guilt. You don't apologize and you don't back down. You young people that are out there who are university students, you need to take over the student unions. You need to take them back because they're absolute snake pits, and they have been since the 1990s. And with regards to the universities, I thought at one point that the best thing to do would be to cut their funding by 25% and let them fight amongst themselves for the remnants, because it would force the universities to decide exactly what's important and what isn't. So I would say the humanities and much of the social sciences has turned into a postmodern neo-Marxist playground for radicals. The scholarship is terrible. 80% of humanities papers aren't cited once. And so what that means is that they write papers for each other and they sell them to libraries, and that's how the publishers make their money. No one reads them, but the publishers can print them because the libraries have to buy them, and they're buying them with your tax money. And so all of you who are sitting here are funding a postmodern radical neo-Marxist agenda that has its roots in the university, and your tax money is going towards that. And if you want proof of that, you just go online and look at the websites, especially of disciplines like women's studies, which is pathological right to the core. But it's not just women's studies, it's all the ethnic studies groups. It's anthropology, it's sociology, it's social work, and most of all, it's education.
In a paper titled Becoming Eventful, Making the More Than of a Youth Activist Conference Matter, Professor Reynolds writes, in a post-evidence and post-truth world when research data struggles to matter and inquiry after inquiry, policy after policy seem to unfold as hollow or unsustainable grand gestures, new practices and new concepts are needed. She describes the launch of her online educational resource, Agenda. Agenda's affirmative approach to risky, radical and overtly political content has gained momentum. Schools in particular are reaching out for support, and Agenda, via our outreach team, has been responding. A gender is and has become more than a resource. It is a lively doing and embedded in an imminent praxis. It is becoming eventful, both in the sense that it is a happening and in the sense that when it happens, something new transpires. The launch was one of the first encounters where we began to learn about what it means for a resource to become eventful through the making of data and data facts. In a paragraph headed Gifting Agendas, Reynolds writes, "The late morning activities and workshops culminate with an invitation for the teachers and youth workers to rejoin the main space and interact with the data and data facts created by young people. Key here is allowing just enough time for young people to share their data and data facts, if they choose to, and plan forward what might be possible in their own locale. It is also a dedicated moment for teachers to register the effective energies generated by enabling young people to platform their views in creative ways. For example, one group's pledged gold plate for how to make their schools more inclusive resulted in them setting up a new gender and sexuality support group. A need sparked by two students who, during the Runway for Change activity, shared troubling coming-out stories as lesbian and as non-binary. The non-binary category is required by postmodernists to dissolve the binary opposition between male and female. Not every trans person is enthusiastic about this category. Non-binary people are being medicalized. As Dr. Hilary Cass states in her report, medication is binary, but the fastest growing group identifying under the trans umbrella is non-binary, and we know even less about the outcomes for this group. On the 24th of April 2024, Reem Al-Salem, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, stated that the implementation of the Cass report was key to protecting girls from serious harm. As yet, the Welsh Government have not responded.